When Lena moved into her new apartment, she was delighted to finally have a place to call her own. It was charmingly cozy, with its aged wooden floors and vintage wallpaper giving it a nostalgic appeal. Everything felt just right, except for one peculiar feature. At the far end of the apartment stood a door. But this wasn't any ordinary door. It had no handle, no keyhole, just a smooth, unmarked wooden surface seamlessly set into the wall, as though it belonged yet didn't. Initially, Lena dismissed it. She assumed it was merely a quirky architectural detail, or perhaps an old, unused storage space. But every time she passed it, she felt an inexplicable tug, as if the door was silently beckoning her. The feeling gnawed at her until she could no longer resist her curiosity. One day, she decided to investigate. She placed her hand on the door, fully expecting it to be sealed shut. To her astonishment, it swung open effortlessly. Beyond the threshold lay a narrow, pitch-black corridor stretching endlessly into the void. The air inside felt dense, and the temperature plummeted the moment she stepped in. Strangely, she could not even hear her own footsteps. The silence was oppressive. Though apprehensive, she felt an irresistible urge to keep going. As she ventured deeper into the corridor, the walls seemed to press closer, and the heavy air grew stifling. Then, in the distance, she noticed something. A dim, flickering light glimmering at the far end of the passage. When Lena finally reached the source of the light, she found herself in a small, dilapidated room. The floor was thick with dust and cobwebs, and the cracked walls gave the impression that the space had been abandoned for decades. But what caught her attention most was a tall, full-length mirror leaning against the far wall. As she moved closer, something unsettling happened. Her reflection didn't quite follow her movements. It lagged at first, then started moving independently. Suddenly, her reflection smiled, an expression she hadn't made herself. It felt disturbingly alive. Alarmed, she tried to step back, but her legs refused to move. The reflection, now grinning wider, began beckoning her, silently urging her to step closer, as though it wanted her to enter the mirror. Lena felt an invisible force pulling her forward, her body disobeying her mind. Panic took hold as the reflection's smile turned sinister, its eyes dark and ravenous. "Come closer," it whispered, but the voice wasn't coming from the mirror. It was behind her. Before she could react, the door slammed shut with a deafening thud. Spinning around, she saw no way out. The room wasn't just confining her, it was alive. A cold, horrifying realization sank in. It wasn't just the reflection luring her in. The entire room was a trap. The walls seemed to inch closer. With every heartbeat, the air thickening, suffocating her. Lena was trapped, ensnared by a place that defied reality, with no escape in sight. Lena's breath quickened as the walls seemed to pulsate, pressing in on her like a living entity intent on devouring its prey. She turned back toward the mirror, her reflection now staring at her with an almost predatory glee. Its grin stretched unnaturally wide, and its eyes glowed faintly, flickering like the light that had led her here. "Why fight it?" the reflection said, its voice calm yet chilling. "You're already mine." Lena screamed, her voice echoing endlessly in the cramped room. She clawed at the walls, hoping for some hidden door or weak spot to push through. But the cracked plaster and cobwebs seemed to harden under her touch, as if mocking her efforts. The air grew colder still, and her vision began to blur. The mirror shimmered, the surface rippling like liquid. Her reflection extended a hand outward, as if breaching the barrier between its world and hers. Lena stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The room had shrunk so much that her back was now pressed against the wall. "Don't resist," the reflection whispered, now half emerged from the mirror. Its hand, unnervingly solid and cold, brushed against hers. The touch sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She tried to pull away, but the reflection's grip was impossibly strong. Suddenly, the light flickered violently, casting the room into alternating bursts of brightness and darkness. In the brief moments of illumination, Lena noticed something terrifying. Shadowy figures in the cracks of the walls, watching her, waiting. They seemed to writhe in anticipation, their hollow eyes fixated on her. Desperate, she summoned every ounce of strength and screamed again, thrashing against the force pulling her toward the mirror. In a frantic last effort, she grabbed a shard of broken glass lying on the floor and slashed at the reflection's hand. The moment the glass made contact, the mirror let out an ear-piercing shriek. The reflection recoiled, its grin finally faltering. The mirror began to crack, fissures spreading across its surface like a spiderweb. The walls trembled, the air vibrating with a strange energy. Lena seized the moment, hurling the shard directly at the mirror. The glass shattered completely, the room plunging into absolute darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the ground beneath her feet began to rumble. The walls groaned as if in pain, and a powerful force knocked her off her feet. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the room. She was back in her apartment, sprawled on the wooden floor, gasping for air. The strange door was gone. The wall where it had been was now seamless, as if the door had never existed. Lena stared at the spot, trembling, unsure if she had escaped, or if the nightmare had just begun. In the days following her escape, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The door might have vanished, but the apartment no longer felt like her own. Shadows seemed to linger too long in the corners, and she would often catch fleeting glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, only to find nothing there when she turned. Her dreams became relentless. Every night, she was back in that dark corridor, hearing faint whispers and seeing her reflection, its smile growing wider, its eyes hungrier. The whispers became louder with each passing night, repeating the same chilling phrase. Lena tried to convince herself it was all in her head, a lingering trauma from whatever had happened in that room. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Something had followed her back. One evening, as she sat in her living room, attempting to distract herself with the television, the screen suddenly flickered and turned to static. For a moment, the static formed a shape, a faint outline of her own face, smiling. She turned off the TV with trembling hands and stood frozen in the silence of her apartment. That's when she heard it. A faint knock. Not from her front door, but from the wall where the mysterious door had once been. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the apartment. Lena backed away, her heart pounding. "No," she whispered to herself. "It's gone. It's gone." But the knock persisted, turning into a steady, rhythmic pounding. The sound reverberated through her body, growing louder and more insistent, until it stopped suddenly. The silence was suffocating. Then she heard it. A voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from inside the wall. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" The wallpaper began to peel, curling at the edges, revealing the smooth, featureless surface of a door reappearing before her eyes. It was the same door, seamless and handleless, now pulsing faintly as though it were alive. This time, there was no ignoring it. The pull was stronger than ever, an invisible force drawing her closer, her feet moving on their own, despite her desperate attempts to resist. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping in a cacophony of voices that filled the apartment. "No!" Lena screamed, clawing at the floor, trying to anchor herself. But it was futile. The door began to open on its own, revealing the same dark corridor she thought she had escaped. The icy air rushed out, enveloping her, pulling her back into the void. As Lena was dragged through the doorway, she let out one final desperate scream. The door slammed shut behind her, and the apartment fell silent once more. From the other side of the wall, nothing remained. No door, no sound. Just the faintest impression of a smile etched into the wallpaper, waiting for the next tenant. Top of form. Bottom of form. Do not forget to subscribe and push the like button. Your support can help us to bring more impactful stories.